and chaos was sort of the norm. So, like, growing up, my kids never, like, Dad was always not home on holidays or, weekends. That's what they grew to know. So, but it got to a point where, it got kind of rough. And as they got a little bit older, it was like I was looking for some sort of stability, because this sort of life is, it's nobody's apologizing, but, because certainly I chose it and I enjoyed it, but at a certain point it becomes sort of tedious. Also, working in a news bureau, the old joke was, we cover, Olympics, basketball, baseball, train wrecks, riots, and earthquakes, because anytime there was any news situation, it was like, you under the desk, get up, you're going in a helicopter, or you're, put on your Kevlar vest, you're going down to this neighborhood or that, and like, okay. And so that was sort of part of the deal. So around the mid-'90s, as my kids started getting a little older, I had an epiphany. It was probably about 0 degrees, and I was in Salt Lake City, and I was carrying a stack of tapes around midnight, running to a feed point to make a feed, and I got my foot caught in the crack on the sidewalk, and the tapes flew up all in the air and landed, and they're scattered all about. So it's 0 degrees. It's about midnight. I'm in Utah, and I'm thinking, like, I'm done. So I can't do this anymore. So I went home, and we had a little discussion and said, okay, well, we're going to try and get a job. I'm going to try and get a job somewhere else. If all else fails, I'll try and go to, we can go back to Atlanta, try and get a job with the home base. So I made some phone calls. I got offered a job in a local television in Denver, sight unseen, just over the phone. After a few phone conversations, and what was interesting there is, I had always been part of a network where we, traveled and did things and had certain benefits. And now suddenly I was talking to a local channel in Denver, and they're like saying, yeah, you work 6 months. We'll see if we can give you, a week off. And, we, don't really do much traveling and this and that. And sort of it occurred to me that sometimes, and this is sort of maybe if nothing else, this is maybe the first lesson to you, you sometimes don't value once you're in a job until you take a step back and start looking around at other jobs and start comparing things. So even though you might think, like, I've had enough of my job or my job sucks, take a step back and start, like, comparing, and then maybe you'll also have a little bit more value or start thinking a little bit differently about what you have. So I went back to Atlanta, moved to Atlanta in like 95 or 96, and then stayed in-house, still did some more traveling, and suddenly, for the first time in my life, I had actually weekends off. But there was a lot of work to be done, and it was very strenuous. We started a show called Page One, which was sort of a topical, issue-oriented show, and that was very rewarding. And then around 2000, when the internet blew up, I got an offer from a company in Seattle that had gotten a hold of me, somebody I had talked to, and this was when the internet was starting to boom, and they courted me for a couple of months back and forth, and then finally they offered me a significant amount of money to come to join them in Seattle. So we were living in Atlanta, bought the kids. I think we had picked up another kid along the way, so now there were 3 kids. The third one is referred to as the Georgia experiment. And so now we're going to Seattle. We bought the kids the books. We said, this is where you're going. There are volcanoes and all the stuff. So I went there, and this little internet company was up and running. Okay, so they were a bunch of ex-Mariner executives, young guys, and very vibrant, and great bunch of people. And they already had the Major League Baseball digital video rights. They had the NFL. They were on the verge of getting the NBA and NHL. Because all the leagues at that point, they didn't know really what to do with their digital video rights. Now they're selling them for millions and billions of dollars. But back then, the league executives barely knew what the internet was. So they made a deal. So they they had a first round of financing was from the Starbucks guy, Howard Schultz, that got them rolling. So they were in business. Everything was full steam ahead. So they hired me as sort of the managing editor to handle all their video operation, which is interesting because it's kind of what I'm doing now, 11 years later. So I went to Seattle, put the house on the market, did all the research, schools, housing, we're moving to Seattle. And then I was there for about 3 weeks, and the CEO, he comes to me, and he looks very ashen, and he goes, I need to talk to you. We need to have lunch. And I'm like, okay. And he starts with, I feel worse for you than anybody else. And I'm like, oh, I wonder where this is going. And so he goes on to tell me, and the reason he waited to hire me was, so the first, the seed money was like $5 million from Howard Schultz, and then the second round of financing was like $30 million, and that was going to sort of get us over the hump, buy equipment and whatever. And in those days, sort of the goal, one of the goals was, nobody really wanted to admit it, but the goal was to get gobbled up by a big company, and then everybody makes a lot of money. So, they entice you with stock options and high salaries, and, honestly, that wasn't why I was doing it. I was doing it because it really seemed like a good opportunity. It seemed like the future. So this internet company that I went to, they were doing customized highlights and sports news for consumers. So you could log on and say, I like the Pittsburgh Penguins, UCLA basketball, Yankees, and Spurs. And then when you woke up, if those sports were in season, you'd get customized highlights like you would now, and you'd get condensed sports news. So in some ways, it was really way ahead of its time. Now, the catch was, and this was the problem, is that at that point, it was geared for broadband, high-speed internet. And at that point in 2000, only 10% of the country actually had broadband. I don't know whether are you old enough to remember when it was dial-up? Yeah, right, through the phone. And so the video was really it was, dime-sized, and it was all jittery, and it was just a horrible experience. So this company knew that, and on the front of their website, it was called seasonticket.com. And so on the front of the website, it said, unless you have broadband, don't waste your time. So the problem was there wasn't penetration. So lunch ended. He told me that the second round of financing, the people who had promised $30 million, the economy had the bubble had burst around the same time I moved out there. So they took the money off the table. So now suddenly I'm stranded in Seattle. I call back, take the house off the market. I don't know what's going on. So we spent the last 3 months and the end of the money really trying to get bought by anybody who would gobble us up. So we went on little dog and pony shows to Yahoo, to Intel, to CBS Sportsline, all in an effort to get bought and at least make a little bit of money or get gobbled up and have a new job. Now, the cruel irony was that right before I got there, Michael Eisner, who was then the CEO of Disney, his son was goofing around on the internet and came upon seasonticket.com, and he said, hey, Dad, look at this. So Eisner sends the head of ESPN out to Season Ticket and offers them, I think something like $50 million for ESPN just to buy it sight unseen. Howard Schultz thinks he's sitting on a home run and says, no, we don't want to sell. And then, 4 months later, the whole thing was over and out the door. So while I was there panicking on what am I going to do, I called some of the people I worked with at ESPN, and I ended up landing a job with them. I could have gone back to CNN because I was good friends with some people high up, and they would have offered me my job back. But I decided that I should probably just maybe try something different. So I ended up at ESPN, and then I started working on SportsCenter for a couple of years, and then hooked on to Outside the Lines. At one point, Outside the Lines was a monthly show, and then it became daily, and then nightly, and then daily at around 2003. And so then probably around 2007 or so, they formed something called the Enterprise Unit, which was basically doing long-form journalism.